Hey everyone, I have a special treat for you today. I just did an interview with Austin Welch, and I wanted to let you know a little bit about him. So, his learning films have earned 3 Brandon Hall Awards, and he has spoken about the emerging role of media and learning at the International Association of Food Protection, the International Conference for the Association of Talent Development, ATD, and TEDx. As a Kirkpatrick Certified Professional, Austin is always looking for ways to create emotionally intelligent training films that lead to measurable behavior change. We had a ton of fun on this podcast, on this episode, and you're going to love having your brain tickled because he drops so many knowledge bombs. It's just absolutely awesome. Plus, on top of that, not just theory, he has some awesome strategies for creativity, for brainstorming, and also storytelling, of course. So I hope you enjoy. Austin, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy guy, lots of things coming up, which is great. I mean, like you wouldn't want it any other way, would you?
No, absolutely not.
Awesome. Okay, so basically, it's funny because before I speak to anybody, they're like, here's all the topics that would be cool if we talked about. And then I did a little bit of research, and I found all this really cool language on your profile. And I was like, I can't let this go, man. We're going to dig into this. So that's what we're going to do today. So first off, I want you to tell me about inductive learning experiences. What? This is a new phrase. So dig into that for me, would you?
Yeah, definitely. So this is, it's something I came across years ago, and I was like, this, if I would have been taught with this method in high school, I think I would have been a much better student, because I have a very inquisitive mind. And so I personally don't do well with just like being given facts and being like, hey, accept this as reality. Like I'm that why kid. I always want to know why and drill deeper. And so inductive learning, so traditionally deductive learning is what we think of with standard pedagogy, right? You present information and then you provide support of why that's true. And then usually there's quizzing at the end, right? To test knowledge. So you're basically given the answer and then provided support for that answer or for that thing. Inductive is kind of the reverse of that, right? So inductive provides that support or those examples, and then you lead the learner to infer what the rule is, right? So what is the thing? What are the commonalities here? And so storytelling for me is a great way to do that, because within storytelling, like a really bad story is if I just tell you how it is, right? Or I tell you here's what I want you to learn, right? There's not that cognitive load that we're looking for people to create and connect those dots themselves. So inductive learning uses that kind of Socratic method, right? Where it's like, we're going to keep asking and discussing this until we come up with what we feel is a strong answer to it. But it also leads learners to own that, right? And that's one of the big things we do with leadership and ethics and anti-harassment is like, I don't want to just give people knowledge, right? Because we know that knowledge does not equate to behaviors, right? And I'm looking for behavior, right? Knowledge is nice. The behavior is what I'm getting paid for to actually affect within the courses I create. If by not just giving them the answer, we walk them through this and they find their own truth, right? So what resonates with me as a person, with me, the learner, with my moral compass and where I am in life. And, like I say, if you want someone to adopt an idea, have them think that it's their idea. And that's exactly what inductive learning does, is it provides the environment where it is their own idea, right? They can create their own truth. Our job as facilitators is to make sure that we're kind of still guiding that conversation, but giving them that sense of autonomy and freedom to figure these things out for themselves.
That really resonates with me. And I was going to ask him, like, how does storytelling fit into this? But there's this aspect of persuasion also that you're talking about there, how it's a better lesson if somebody figures it out for themselves in the context of their own mind. And I think that there's a lot of times we spoon feed people because we're scared they're not going to get it. So how do you overcome that? Because people are like, well, what if they don't get the lesson?
So that's where it comes down to. So I will say this, that all the trainings I create, none of them have quizzing or testing, right? Because that's not the end goal. So I don't really work in that domain a lot. I'm working with, how do I create a course that leads to a specific outcome, right? And so like that, and a lot of that ties back into like designing your own strategy for bystander intervention, developing your own strategy for food safety and what you can do within your domain, devising your strategy for negotiation that works for you, right? I can't tell you how you want to negotiate in a sales interaction, but you know what you're comfortable with. So I would say like I really hate the saying, the proof is in the pudding, but the proof is in the pudding, right? You get to the end and you're going to be able to see as a facilitator or as the learning team, whether or not this person comprehends this, because the final outcome, right? That behavior, that goal that they've created for themselves will be indicative. But like I said, as we're moving along, we're constantly making sure that they are keeping up with the training and that there isn't any gaps. Even when we're doing training films, right? We will show, a 5-minute, scene within the film, but then we unpack that to make sure that like there's a lot of Easter eggs hidden in there, with nonverbal communication and like, the way that sometimes, we don't want to be totally on the nose on explaining exactly what's happening. So we will debrief that and make sure that like, before we move on, let's make sure everybody's up to speed on the story here. We know who the main character is. We know what's driving them. We know who the, antagonist is and what's driving them. And so, but we unpack that as opposed to saying like, as you can see, our protagonist is ready to do, but like we discuss that. So I think, but yeah, that's been a big beef of mine since I've gotten into the learning industry, is that I'm like, people are not stupid. Like we assume that they are, but that, so that because it's like, well, we see these failures in the training. And I think a lot of times it's because there's no motivation, right? I'm not motivated to take this training. Therefore I'm not fully engaged in it. So I think the big thing is like, if we treat everybody that they have the same level of motivation and care for the work that they do that I do myself, and I just work under that assumption, then I create better training, because now I'm respecting their intelligence as opposed to treating them like a child.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's a level of trust there, I think. And
definitely. And they can feel that and they can sense that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of like, it's interesting because I think if you set those expectations, people will rise up to them, right? They rise to the level that you set. So, yeah. But I love it. And another thing that you touched on, which, I mean, there's many things in there that I could unpack, but the idea of video is, and I wanted you to talk about that, because video is loaded. Like there is so many things that it can encompass. So is that why this is your favorite medium? Like talk to us about video versus other mediums. Like,
oh wow, I mean, like I don't bring this up very much in client meetings, but at the end of the day, I'm an artist. Like that's my gig. Like I've been a musician in previous lifetime. I've worked in marketing and advertising, writing copy and creating campaigns. And then I got into photography, and then I got into video production. So, deep down inside, I want to create really pretty pictures that intrigue people and drive some kind of positive change in the world. I'm an idealistic artist at heart. So that, so originally I started with, I wanted to do really cool, marketing campaigns for companies. And then I started looking, I was randomly hired by a leadership development company, and they'd seen some of the work that I'd done for some of these marketing campaigns. And they were like, hey, can you produce a leadership film for us? And I knew nothing about the industry. And I said, sure, yeah, let's do it. And I created it the way that I thought it should be created. I knew nothing about training films. I didn't know what a training film looked like, right? I just created the story that I thought would work. And they were so thrilled with it. And they were getting this great feedback from their people. And I was like, I don't know what I did different. Can you send me an example of what people are used to seeing? Like what this is being compared to? And they sent me those examples, and I was like, oh my God, like this is an industry that needs some massive help on the video front. So that was when I shifted away from marketing and advertising completely, and was like, hey, I'm going to dedicate my life to learning and development, because this is where I think the specific skill set that I've developed would be best suited. So the video, so why do I feel that video is the best? I mean, I already started out a little biased. I like, imagery to create these stories, but, I would say more important is the storytelling aspect, which you don't always need video for. Now, what's great about video is that, we work with great actors and locations, and we leverage, research in neurocinematics on like, how are we actually going to film this, and what would create the biggest bang for the buck within, my camera movement, the blocking of the actors, the nonverbal communication, those micro expressions, all of that stuff comes into play, which provides such a robust environment to discuss these things, right? We can do a 3-minute scene and then talk about it for an hour if you want to, because there's so much to unpack there, because the complexity of human conversation and relationships, which is, that nuance. And that's that inductive learning, right? I can tell you what selling in this way looks like, or leading in this way looks like, but if I can show you an example, and then you start to infer the rules that are part of this game, then it's a much stronger connection emotionally. So I think, and then there's, aspects of like, there's the, audio aspect versus the video aspect, and then the like conversation. So it's just creating these really well-rounded learning experiences. But I think, of course, I think video is the best, and creating and using these stories, because people are used to consuming, stories. They watch TV shows, they watch movies, and everything that we watch, we're learning something, right? And this is an example I give to many people. I could take an episode of Mad Men, right? And I could write curriculum for that. They could talk about civil rights. I could talk about harassment in the workplace. I could talk about alcoholism. I could talk about family dynamics and burnout at work. I mean, like, all these things are already included in there. They just didn't need a curriculum for it. But I'm like, so we're always learning when we're watching this in these shows and consuming this information. Now that's exactly the bridge we're trying to, create in the learning world, is that like, it's not just entertainment. There's so much rich, nuanced information in these scenes that it would be almost impossible with any other medium to convey that much information.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I find actually most of the video projects I've worked on, I found that the people who had these training videos, they didn't really realize that in some cases having somebody watch a video like that and expect them to draw their own conclusions without a debrief is actually overwhelming, because they don't even know there's so much info. So you got to be strategic with it. So okay. So as far as you posted actually a really cool post like an hour ago, I think, with Richard, and it was about endings being the hardest part. So can you talk a little bit about like your storytelling framework, and then why the heck are endings the hardest part?
Definitely. And Richard might have a different response to this, but I think I
hope so.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
The ending is the hardest part because there's infinite possibility, right? And this is what makes creativity hard a lot of times, is that infinite possibility, and what do I do with it? And so in that creative framework, I got to just nip that in the bud immediately and be like, okay, how do I want to end this? Like, because I can decide, is it, and I think we talked about this in that video. It's like simple. Do I want it happy? Do I want it sad? Those are the two most common endings, right? And so, okay, I decide I want to go with the sad ending. And I'm like, okay, well, now how do I reverse engineer the story? I've now knocked off one of the hardest things off the list, which I'm like, now I know how it's going to end. Now I have more freedom in creating, the storyline that will support that ending, that will bring us to that ending. So yeah, I think, so much of what Richard and I do, because we're lifelong professional creatives, is that we've had to create these frameworks, right? Because when a client signs on the dotted line and hands me a check, I can't wait for the muse to strike, right? I've got to sit down and have a process in place to hit the ground running. And like, I might not have the best ideas right out of the gate, but I've got something to start work with. And that's that it's about motion. You know, writer's block is basically, like they say, to overcome writer's block, you just write. I mean, it's a really simple solution. You just write. Doesn't have to be good, because 95% of what I create is not good, right? What I share with the world is that 5%. The other 95% is in the trash can, right? I mean, we shoot a 30-minute training film, and there's 4 hours of crap footage that never the light of day. You know, that's and so that gets into the editing process and the importance of editing and being, getting comfortable with creating really bad ideas and then refining over and over again until now it is formed into this beautiful little diamond that I want it to be. Sorry, I get really tangential. I'm realizing that as I'm talking with you. You're like, you asked me one question. Now we've got multiple rabbit trails I'm going down here. But yeah, so starting with the end in mind, it just makes it relieves that whole concept of like, how am I going to do that? Because it also gives you an endpoint, right? If I set out on a road trip and I'm like, well, where are you going to go? And I'm like, I'm just gonna go see where it takes me. Some people might want to go that way, but if I got to be in LA at noon on Friday, then I'm like, that's my end destination. That's the end of my story. Now I got to figure out how to make that happen. And that's usually what we're looking to do with the story, is like, we're not looking to meander our way and hope for the best. It's like, we need a strategy. And so I'm like, okay, I need to be at LA noon on Friday. How am I going to make that happen? And that's all my plot points and my, different circumstances that I introduce to the character and the conflict and, all those other things that make that story intriguing.
So it's interesting because I think that a lot of people approach storytelling and L&D from that, this creative aspect. So they're like, oh, I'm J.K. Rowling. I'm going to just start crafting stories in the workplace. And it's interesting because one of the things, it's like almost that there's an onus on us to pull away a little bit from that creativity and be like, there's a purpose to my story. It is a lesson. So I have to constrain myself to this. I will have to know how this ends.
Right.
I can't just, go off with dragons and butterflies and, do that. So that's cool. I like that approach. And do you think that, as far as storytelling goes in L&D, is there places you feel that we could be? Obviously, you're bringing storytelling to our world, but do you think there's places that people could become better storytellers or start simply with storytelling? I think a lot of times you get so many things that are like for writers, like for people who that it's hard to discern what is actually going to be useful to me. So do you have a simple kind of maybe like how to get started and not get overwhelmed? But your first thing, like your first ever story that you've written since high school, what would it, how to get started with that?
Definitely. I hate to do a shameless plug, but I'll do it. So we actually created a course specifically for that. If you've never written a story within your learning design career, well, here's a framework. And this is basically, it's the exact same framework that we use for, these large scale training films, but the framework works for anything, whether you're writing a blog or creating a PowerPoint based, project or articulate rise, whatever format you're using is kind of irrelevant. But the biggest thing that I think one of the coolest things about it is you start like in the course and you have as long as you show up with a learning objective, that's all you need. Like, what's the learning objective you're working on? And then we take and we workshop that learning objective step by step through every single process so that by the end of the course, you have a written story. Mm-hmm. That was something, and I think you can attest to this as well. That was something that as storytellers, we wanted ourselves, right? We go and buy all these books, and there's so many books on storytelling and frameworks. But what we couldn't find was someone who just said, do this, then do this, then do this. And I was like, I want a paint by numbers approach to storytelling. Just tell me what to do. Because so much of what we see is, books on writing will reverse engineer existing great stories. Like, look, tell you why The Great Gatsby is such a great story, or we'll talk about what made Star Wars so great. But I'm like, that's still theory, right? That's Star Wars. That's that story. I have my own story, and I'm like, I need the tactical stuff of like, okay, cool. Like I know Darth Vader. How do I create my own antagonist? How do I create my own protagonist? How do I design conflict that makes sense? And so that's so much of what we wanted to see. And we were like, well, if no one else is going to do it, then we'll just build it and and provide it to people, because that's the same tool that it's basically our documented process. So that's one of the big things that, I wanted to get out to the learning community, because we get people asking all the time, like, how do you do that? How do you create these stories from scratch? And I think the biggest thing is that we're saying, hey, it's not created from just scratch, right? We always have a kernel of truth that we're looking to prove with the story, which is that learning objective. Mm-hmm. Okay, now how do we take that learning objective? And within that learning objective, as long as you have an audience and a behavior, right? So if you're following like the ABCD method of like learning objectives or whatever, as long as you have an audience and a behavior, you have a story in there, right? We are just helping you mine that story out of your learning objective, because it's that mental twist of not seeing it as a learning objective, but seeing it as a story. And that's what we're trying to like help people make that transition. And the biggest part for us is going from learning objective into what we call the core premise, right? Which is your character, your conflict, and your conclusion. Once I know who my best character is, the conflict they're going to face, and the conclusion, which I've already identified, right? So I've got a third of it knocked out before I do anything. Then now I have this foundation that I can create this story on, right? I know who I'm talking about. I know that. And I know it's either going to end tragically or uplifting, right? And so now so we just really want to walk people through this piece, step by step, because that's how it's done. Like I said, like I refuse to believe in the muse, because, the muse never comes along whenever you really need it to. So we have these processes in place.
You totally took the romantic side out of it for me. Totally. Just kidding. No, I
think there definitely is a romantic side. I mean, and I use the same analogy with music, right? I have to learn the scales and the chord progressions. And then once I have that, now I have freedom within these rules, right? And I have freedom to break those rules if I want, but I know the rules now. And I have an understanding of like how the structure of these songs comes together. And the same thing with storytelling. It's like, they talk about what makes a good game is good rules, right? And it's the same concept with storytelling. Like we have these rules, and within that, I have so much freedom, because now I have a foundational understanding of what storytelling is. It's not this magical, ethereal thing. It's like, here's what needs to happen, but within that, you can play infinitely, right? Yes. And that's that to me. So there's freedom in that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like just like when you talked about creativity, and the constraints within that you create actually help you be more creative within that framework. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so so many questions. Okay, emotion. Why is emotion important? Because listen, I was just looking through like posts of people are posting like their, this is what I'm reading, and for L&D, and it's just all books on strategy, and there's nothing about feelings, emotions, stories. It's like this. It doesn't even exist. It's like we're not even emotional creatures. But how does emotion mix with learning? Tell me about that.
Oh my gosh! I mean, it's everything. In my opinion, right? There's a great book, Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman. And I mean, and what he's basically talking about is, emotion is essentially the gatekeeper to our cognitive critical thinking mind, right? We make quick decisions on whether or not I, as a being, will consume the calories necessary to process this information. And emotion is the way that we move through that. And we know from sales, right, that people buy on emotion and they close on logic, right? So that's the same thing, that exact same rule applies in learning, right? I reel them in with the emotion so that I can access that critical thinking. Otherwise, because there's that apathy, right? People come in and it's like, well, why should I do this? What's in it for me? How is this going to improve my life? The biggest way that we try to trigger emotion is, we do a couple of different things. We shock factor in our films, right? We really just kind of reach out and grab you by the throat. And it's like, whoa, this is serious stuff. Or we leverage curiosity, and curiosity is one of the greatest motivators of all time, right? That curiosity, almost by definition, is intrinsic motivation. It's this internal need to figure something out. It's not because you're forced to, it's because I got an itch and it's got to be scratched. And so how do I create that itch? So the emotion side, we're human beings are not as smart as we think we are, right? We're biased, we're flawed, we're lazy. And so I think a lot of what learning design and pedagogy focuses on is this idealistic, perfect human being, And it's like, if we give them the information and then they pass the test, then they'll go out and they'll do the thing. False, 100% false, right? We know that, passing the test there's no direct correlation to a behavior as a result of that. All we know is that they know that information now. And once again, we see this with, diversity and inclusion and anti-harassment training, right? They've been rolling that stuff out for 30 years now, but there's still the same amount of sexual harassment claims every single year. Training is not helping. It's not changing behavior. So, but you know what? We got great test scores. So I'm like, so that's where we, looked at, and that was a hard topic. And so a few years ago, I looked into that and through doing a lot of research into why is anti-harassment training not effective? Why do people hate it? Why is it so typically boring? All the things, because, sexual harassment training is it's the punchline of jokes. That's how bad it is. And so I was like, what can we do to improve this? Is a very important topic that we don't seem to be taking very seriously. And so I did a lot of research and, it led me to bystander intervention, because I'm like, well, bystander intervention taps into some emotional aspects, right? When we look at the emotion, it's like, well, this is something that will help you be an advocate for people, because most people want to do that. And it also will help create better lines of communication with you and your team. So there's this emotional oh, okay, well, that sounds good, as opposed to hey, it's that time of year, we got to check this box, just go do it, right? So once again, I've gone off on rabbit trails. Emotion, very important, because of the fact emotion is a gatekeeper to the critical thinking. And we make decisions based off emotion. Whether or not I'm going to implement this training, what I've learned is based off the emotional appeal within it. And so that's something that we're constantly trying to tap into. And it is a bit of an uphill battle, right? Because when we're talking to the C-suite, there's this idea, and it's a romantic idea that we have smart people and you just need to give them the information and they'll do the thing. And we have to be the bearers of bad news. And it's like, that absolutely not. That's why you're talking to us now, because you've tried everything else and it hasn't worked. We are usually the last line of defense.
It's interesting because I always reflect that people who are drawn to the L&D industry are the 1% that are seeking out info. We are when people are I'm a lifelong learner, right? Everybody's a lifelong learner. And then when you look at the statistics of the general population, like, I think it's something disgusting, but like 90% of people read one book a year or less. Right? Like, and that's reality. So when we're like, they're intrinsically motivated, you're like, no, there's all this stuff. And then the other thing I'm thinking, as you brought this up, is this idea of, we always, we have models that say, okay, you want to create relevant learning. Okay, the first question you ask is, what do they need to do? And you're like, okay, well, you need to eat low carb. Okay, if that was enough, then we'd all have like, six packs and be like amazing leaders and amazing, husbands and wives, because I would just know what to do. But then there's that follow-up question. And this is from Kathy Moore's model. She goes, but what makes it difficult? And I think that a lot of people look at, what are environmental factors like, the information's not accessible. I can't find it. It's, but maybe what if that makes it difficult is how I feel about that.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do you tackle that, right? And for me, it would feel like storytelling would be like a great fit in there, because you're trying to figure out, is the way I feel about this action, like, okay, me going on a diet, how do I feel about that? Because it's straight cut, so straightforward. I know I'm not supposed to eat ice cream every day. It's fine, but how do I feel about that sacrifice? And is it worth it for me? So this idea of emotion, for me, you brought it up, is very important. And it's a very important problem, because like you said, it's the gateway. It's the gateway for me to buy into your persuasion that I should, eat less ice cream or whatever that is.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and that also gets back to that inductive learning, or that Socratic method, where it's like, we're going to continue to investigate. And it's like, so we're not going to just talk about why you shouldn't eat ice cream. It's like, let's talk through this. Like, Anna, why are some of the downsides of eating ice cream? And then, walking it through, devising, strategies, right? And so this gets into like new habit forming and stuff like that. But, when we talk about what makes it difficult, and it's like, well, let's talk about what makes that difficult. And then let's devise the strategy that will make this easier. I think what makes that hard sometimes is that, it's finding the balance between how do we create a fully asynchronous training that provides that type of feedback and that type of support, versus having a facilitator. Like, in a perfect world, I want a facilitator, right? Because I'm creating, like I said, very nuanced story elements that the power of that story is in the unpacking of it, right? It's in that critical thinking. And sometimes that requires someone to guide that conversation, because you don't know exactly where that conversation is going to lead.
Oh, yeah. I mean, one of the most fun for me is like going to a movie with my husband, and then we'll walk out of there and he'll be like, did you get that? And I'm like, whoa, I got a completely, and we'll be like, no, that's not what it was about. Or sometimes I get whoa, I didn't think of that. So I'm all, yeah, I got that. So it's interesting though, because we are coming in with our own perspective and our own lens of how we perceive things and who resonates with us. So for me, yeah, that debrief, the facilitator, and also having other people.
But I think what's also really cool is to see, like, say the organization is using DISC as an assessment tool. Then it's like, well, okay, how did the D's in here interpret this scene versus how the I's, right? Because that goes to, it also provides the opportunity to show, like, we literally view these interactions that we are witnessing in completely different ways, right? I can show someone who is friendly and courteous, but very curt, right? Quick and to the point. And someone might view that as rude, right? But it's like, so let's talk about what that looks like. And, someone else could be, there's so many different versions of this, but I think the point is that, tapping into the other tools that you're using as an organization. And it's like, how can we roll that in, so if we're looking at DISC or, Myers-Briggs or whatever, there's myriad different ones out there, but it's like, okay, well, let's see how our communication styles are different. Because that's what's so fun about creating films, right? Is that when we write the dialogue for a scene, they never say what they want, right? Like very rarely does the person say exactly what they want. And that's one of the big things that we see with training films, and what makes them so bad is that the people are saying exactly what they want, right? Like, Bob, I don't, your timeline for the launch of this machine just doesn't work for me because my team is very overtaxed right now. And it's like, no one would say that, I mean, so within the dialogue in these scenes, and that's the key to writing great dialogue, is like withhold them saying what they actually want to say as long as you possibly can, right? And create that tension so that people are looking and going like, and that's that intensity, right? But what's fascinating is how people interpret those scenes. We kept, one of our training films, it left on a cliffhanger, right? Like we don't answer the question for you. We leave two equally plausible situations. And the reason we did that is because we were like, it's to get the learner to think, what would I do in this situation? Would I have gone this route or would I have gone this route? Some people, it drives them crazy, right? Because they're like, I want to know what happens. And that's not the point.
You opened a loop.
But
that's cruel. That is cruel.
Well, it's so many people, but we get the feedback and it's a mix, right? Some people are like, I want to know what happens. And other people are like, I love the fact that you didn't show what he did because it left me to have that interpretation of like what this guy's going to do with this new information that he has, right? What's he going to do? Because that's the same question I'm presenting to the audience. What are you going to do now that you know this? Are you going to do the right thing? Or are you going to keep going the way that you were going? It's the exact same question. I mean, it's very meta, but
yeah, it is. But it's also cool because even referring back to that disc, that really reveals the personality of like some people need that certainty and closure, and it's like we checked off the box and we got it. And some people like the ambiguity, which is cool because then you want both people on your team, right? So that's fun. I love it. Okay, I saw this phrase, and you're the first person that I've seen use this phrase, corporate mythology. What? What? Talk to me about that. What is that?
That's basically what we were trying to do, is to create, when you think about mythology over time, right? Mythology has been the definition of these cultures. It's been the way that wisdom has been passed on from generation to generation. And that's exactly what we're trying to do in creating this corporate mythology. How do we create the mythos, the story that can permeate throughout the organization to transfer that tacit wisdom, right? And a lot of this started years ago when we started seeing, this mass exodus of boomers leaving the workforce with massive amounts of knowledge, right? And so how do we make sure that stuff is getting passed on to the Gen Xers and the millennials? And so, that's part of it. But also, like, how do we create a story world where we can attach, this information to these characters? And we see this happen within the training films we create. Like we have character names for these actors within the film, and within the company, they start to build even more deeper mythology around these training programs, right? They're like, well, it's great when you hear people say like, oh man, don't be a stan, or something like that. And they'll refer to somebody in the film because now it starts to represent, something just like Poseidon or Zeus, or, these are representations of these ideals. So that's what we're really trying to do is, how do we create that mythos within the organization so that there's a common language, and a common language that, once again, resonates emotionally, right? When you think about mythology, when you think about religion, there's this emotional tie to it. And so how do we create something relatively of the same impact, but within the company? And that's a big question. I was looking at an article yesterday about Boeing, and, they're currently, the FAA is investigating Boeing's culture, right? Because they were like, how did, they know why the 737 MAX was crashing, but they're like, let's keep drilling down. And what was the actual root cause? It wasn't just a software problem, right? There was an issue internally. So now they're investigating the culture. And this is where, I think every companies, thrive or die is in that culture, right? And so the company needs to create that mythology that will even outlive the current CEO, because what we see in Boeing, right, it was a revolving door of CEOs. And if we're relying on leadership to always be that representative of the culture, well, that's not a strong foundation. It's got to be, Boeing is 116 years old, right? They have a much longer culture than the current, executive team. So, the corporate mythology is just, how do we create this common language around topics that are hard to wrap our heads around sometimes, right? You think of old school mythology, it was, how do we make sense of the world? How do we explain floods? How do we explain famine? And so there's this mythology that's created to help us make sense of it. Now we're looking at, how do we explain racism? How do we explain, sexism in the workplace? How do we explain, poor leadership? How do we explain motivation? Like all these things, it's just getting more complex, and so now it's getting into areas around psychology, sociology, philosophy. And these are very important topics, but, it's, if you present it as philosophy, right, I'm going to lose like 99% of my audience, because they're like, oh, no, we're not going to talk about philosophy. But if I can create this mythos, then I'm able to like infuse the complex topics in a way that like creates that the audience can consume in their own way. Does that make sense?
It does. And it's interesting because I never thought about organizations having their own mythology, but then I've seen and I've been at organizations that do this, and I never even, I thought it was kind of quirky. Like, okay, so a couple of years back, I was at Mel Milloway gave me a tour of Amazon headquarters in Seattle. Mm-hmm. And what I thought was kind of quirky is that all of their desks look like their doors on cinder blocks, because when Jeff was first getting started, he didn't have a desk, so he tore off the door and he put it, and so that's supposed to, from what I remember, supposed to signify this bootstrap kind of attitude that, mm-hmm. So it always reminds him. And I was like, that's kind of weird and egotistical, but they were really like, they were on board with it. Like they thought it was pretty cool. And it always was like this reminder of like, can you do more with less? And I was like, that's cool. So that's right. That's kind of a part of that, right? That mythology. Mm-hmm. That's so Definitely. Cool.
Yeah. So it's how do we create a story structure in a way that is able to communicate and convey and create a foundation for people to have these conversations that maybe they otherwise wouldn't be having, because it's like, I don't have the language to discuss, these gray, human interaction situations, right? But so if we can create that foundation for them.
It's weird too, because I think that a lot of times if you ask somebody like, what is your mythos, and what is your culture, maybe they can't really tell you, but then they'll see something that you present to them and they'll be like, that's not us, or this is more like us, right? It like, that's so cool that it's a part of us, or it's a part of your work, but you don't really feel it. And then it's like you're just pulling that out because it's already there.
It is there. Yeah. And that's so much of what we do. Anytime we take on a new client, a new project to create a custom training from the ground up, we do this deep dive session. We call it a clarify session, which is essentially, it's a mix of a needs analysis with a SWOT analysis, with a culture analysis, so that we can understand what the existing mythos is. Because if I ask them, what's your mythos? They're not going to be able to explain
No.
it. Right? But I know the way to ask those questions so that they inadvertently are telling me what the mythos is without us actually talking about the mythos, right? And a lot of that comes down to, what's the most important thing here? Like what what are the norms, right? What do people do when no one's watching, right? And a lot of it is like, give me the dirt, like, why do people leave, right? Why do people leave your company? Why do people complain about it? Like, why are your competitors able to poach your talent? Like, let's get into we do a lot of work in food safety. It's like, why did you have the last recall? What was that? And because that, and we will see the culture led to that recall, without a shadow of a doubt. No matter what it was a human failure at some point in the process. So yeah, I know that I'm very fortunate because a lot of L&D people don't get a full day to sit down with all the stakeholders in one room. As a outside consultant, I'm able to flex a little bit more and basically say, this is what we do. And if you want to engage us, like, this is a requirement. Because I can't create a story out of nothing, right? That's not how creativity works. I have to know what's going on within the organization, what you want to communicate, and then I can start to like flesh out that mythos.
Okay. Now, I have so many questions, but I'm going to focus to one. All right.
Sorry, I'll be quicker.
No. You're just like, there's so many awesome things you're discussing, and there's layers to this. There's levels. Yeah. So, okay. Design thinking and storytelling. How do these things go together? Because I know that you've got storytelling there, and then design thinking, something that's upcoming, right? Mm-hmm. Sage Academy. So talk to me about that. Where's that overlap?
Definitely. So lots of people obviously are using design thinking. It's a big buzzword, I don't know if I would say it's a buzzword. I mean, it's kind of here to stay. It's a great process to design with. We at Sage Academy, we use a process called Foresight, which is FOUR sight, which is a creative problem solving framework, right? And so that is the design thinking approach that we bring, which is very close to design thinking, but it's 4 steps. So the first step is clarify what the issue is. So that's what we were just talking about. I spend the first day really clarifying the problem. For larger scale companies and larger scale engagements, we will do a couple of weeks of interviews, right, with people all the way from the C-suite down to the front line, and I'll get into that in a little bit, but that's a fascinating process. So we clarify the problem, and then we develop, we clarify the problem, then we ideate on potential solutions, right? And so this gets into some really interesting divergent versus convergent activities. People really struggle with divergent thinking, like I do. It's a really hard thing to do, and we can talk a little bit more about that if you want. But yeah, so we clarify the problem, we ideate potential solutions, then we design the actual solution. So that's the writing of the script, that's the creating the learner guide, that's creating the curriculum, the facilitator guide, the trainer, whatever it is. And then obviously the 4th level is the rollout. So that's the delivery. And so that's the process that we go through. And I think a lot of people really, they drop the ball on the clarify is where I see a lot of problems happen. Whenever I meet with these companies, I'm working with a company right now, and they've been working on an initiative for 2 years. I'm like, how in the world can you spend 2 years developing a program? Like that blows my mind. But as we're getting into the nitty gritty of it, I'm like, I don't think there was a great clarity session run on this. I don't think you really got clarity on who your audience is, why, what's going on with them, why they're leaving the company, all these different issues. So and I know that, we talk to some people and they say, well, we've already done that, right? We've worked with the SMEs, we have our learn, but I'm like, yeah, but you haven't done it for a story world, right? And so I'm like, the clarity session and this ideation is specifically for a story, right? Like I can create the training, and much faster if I'm not creating a story to go along with it. But it's like, it's another layer to create that story world. And that requires a lot of clarification. And so when I was talking about those interviews with, different stakeholders, what's fascinating about that gets into, it's almost like therapy a little bit. It's what are they not saying, right? That you start to see patterns of what's not being said. You start to see themes emerging. So it's a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? It'll come to me in just a little bit. But it's reading in between the lines and being like, okay, well, here's the themes we're starting to see, and taking that back to leadership and being like, I'm just shoot it to you straight. Here's what we're seeing, and here's some issues. Does this sound accurate? Does this resonate? And they're like, oh, wow, we never thought of it like that. But yeah, that totally seems to make sense now. So the design thinking process, it just, once again, it's a process that takes us through what is a very complex human-based problem that is very murky and brings a lot of clarity to it in some way. So that's what we are looking to, hopefully in the next year or so, provide, some learning professionals with the same framework that we use there, which is, how do we run a clarify session? I mean, that in and of itself, that took us years to develop that framework, because like each time we run a new session, it's like, oh, here's something that we should have addressed or we should have asked them in advance. So we kind of created this really great checklist of like, here's everything that needs to be addressed for both the design of the curriculum and the design of the story. And then our goal is always, after that first clarify session, within a week, we come back and we pitch the story idea. It's like, here's what we want to do. And if you like this, give us the green light. We'll go ahead and we'll start actually writing it. If you don't like it, we're going to have to come up with something different. And we did a clarify session with a sales training company once. And I was like, dude, the best thing that we could do here is create a Western. Like, that would be the best way to convey this specific type of sales training, because it all made sense, right? They're talking about this, like, the old way of sales training isn't going to work. We got to be able to show, like, you either keep up with this or you die. And I'm like, man, we showed the story about this, apothecary pharmacist who moves out west, and he doesn't, he's trying to sell these old snake oils, but he can't anymore. And so he's got to he's got pharmaceutical companies popping up out east who are now selling things in pill form, and it preserves longer. And I'm like, dude, like everything we need, it totally ties. And they looked at us like we were completely insane. They were like, we are not going to do that. so we had to cut ties, because it was like, it's unfortunate. I think this would be the greatest sales training of all time. You have the budget for it. But they ended up going with a more traditional approach.
So, I wanted to ask you, because, we were talking about you, like the character you rarely resonate with, and you mentioned, a Western. And I know you're a fan of Westerns, obviously. You mentioned
Val Kilmer.
Yeah. And
Doc Holliday.
But I think the last Western that I saw that was like awesome, but also totally surprised me, was Bone Tomahawk. Have you seen?
I've not watched that. I heard really bad things about it.
It's really good, but it's really graphic. Yeah, it's like really, really graphic, but it's really good. You should check it out. I think you'll enjoy it if you like.
I will. Yeah. I'm a big Western fan. I'm actually writing one right now. I'm writing like a short Western film. So hopefully in the next 9 months or so, I'll be able to produce it. I need some investors. Anytime you do a period piece, that's a lot of money.
So if anybody out there is listening and wants to support Austin's Western movie, just reach out, right? Now, okay. Okay. We have a little bit of time. Okay. Do you mind? Do you mind if I?
No, if we run over, I'm good.
Okay. You talked about divergent and convergent thinking, and you said that people struggle with divergent thinking. Now, how do you get good at that? How do you practice getting better at it?
You practice. Yeah, you keep doing it. I think, so just for people who might not be familiar with the term, so divergent thinking is essentially what a lot of people consider brainstorming, right? It's trying to think of as many options or solutions to a problem as possible. And convergent is when you take those myriad ideas and you start to converge on them and say, okay, well, here's the best three, right? And I think the divergent thinking is really hard because part of divergent thinking is not placing judgment on the idea, right? During the process of divergent thinking, it is a non-judgmental time period. And as human beings, we evolutionarily have been trained to judge ideas immediately. That's how we function. We immediately say, this is good or this is bad. I'm going to go this way. I'm going to go this way, right? And so we have to learn to turn that part of our brain off for a little bit and engage in creating outlandish ideas. And that's really hard, right? We're having to tap back into that childlike nature and say, okay, well, what is possible? Because what we see, and we do this within one of our leadership development courses, we say, okay, we're going to, we need 20 ideas of how you can improve, safety in your department. And people will start off and they'll knock out the first 3, 5, 7 pretty easily. But it's in that strain where you start to formulate new ideas. That's what creativity is getting past the mundane, the stuff that is just low-hanging fruit it's been rattling around in your brain for a while. Everybody's thought of that, right? How do we get to those next level ideas? And that's where, and it's really interesting to watch these, especially with executives who aren't, used to being told what to do, and saying like, hey, we're going to sit here and we're going to be uncomfortable with this for a little bit, And
do you think a part of it is because you don't want to look stupid, so you got this ego resistance?
Without a doubt, because there's so much going on internally. It's like I'm judging my ideas, but I also know that other people are going to judge my ideas, and then they're going to judge me as a result of that. So much of it is like also like, how do we create a safe space where it's like there are no bad ideas here, there's just ideas. And so the way that we, help people through that is sometimes we'll pull them out of their normal environment, right? So once again, say I'm doing food safety with somebody. I'm going to say, okay, first what we're going to do to kind of warm up is let's come up with as many new ideas for an innovative shoe as possible. How could we improve the shoe? How could we improve the bathtub, right? Anything. You can pick anything.
Toilet.
Yeah. How can you improve the toilet? I don't know if you saw that article recently where they're talking about creating toilets that are on a slight dip so that employees don't spend as much time in the bathroom. It creates strain on your leg. And I was like, wow, that is absolutely amazing. So the way to try to get through that or to warm up is to go through that, because no one's going to have judgment over it. It's like we're a bunch of car executives, or leadership in the car industry talking about designing a shoe. We obviously don't know anything about shoes, so John's not going to judge me for my goofy idea because he's going to have equally goofy ideas. And so it gets you into that comfort zone of just like spitballing stuff and being like, and just getting past that, like, we're not going to create judgment. We're not going to create judgment, and you'll see people. It's so interesting to watch because you'll see them like, and they'll come up with something and they'll go, no. And I'll point down and be like, no, I saw that. Like, so
I love that.
Yeah, we have to just keep practicing, but doing a warm up is great like that. Because it's hard. And once again, Richard and I sit down to do these divergent thinking activities. And even after all these years, we get to that point where it's like, either I'm judging my ideas or I'm telling him I'm tapped, like I got nothing else. And, he's a great coach, so he'll be like, I know you got more. Like, let's just sit here a little bit longer. And he's always right, which is infuriating because I'm like, dude, I have nothing else. I have nothing else to give. You were wrung me dry. And then it's like, no, you got a little bit more. We'll just sit with this a little bit longer. Like, oh my God. But then it happens, and that's where breakthrough happens. So that's that's a huge part, because what we're trying to do with these companies, so many companies that come to us, like I said, they've tried everything. they've done all this stuff and they're like, nothing is working. And so we're the last call. It's like, we're going to go with these crazy guys who create these movies, and they won some awards, so they must be doing something right. And, friends say that they like it, but, everyone always starts off a little like, I don't know. We don't know what to think about this.
Stepping outside of their comfort zone. I love your strategies, though. So for the divergent thinking, definitely sitting in that discomfort for a while is awesome. And then starting off with something completely foreign so that they can get comfortable, just priming your brain. Because we don't do that, right? It is a muscle. You have to flex. And most people don't flex it. They know what they're going to do every day, and they know where they're going to do it. And everything's organized, and there's no point.
It's like they say, keep doing what you're doing. You're going to keep getting what you're getting.
Exactly. So that's why you got to push them outside of their comfort zone. That's cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So how do people learn more about your work? You've got something coming up. I mean, obviously it's very, very soon, but tell us about it, and then how people who can't attend get in touch and learn more about what you do.
Oh, so yeah. So easiest way to reach me is email, which is austin@sage.media. And that's it. No .com, just sage.media. You can check out the work, so all of our custom work, we showcase it on the Sage Media website, the sage.media. We created a secondary company called Sage Academy, which is sage.academy. Because we're hip like that.
You are.
And so Sage Academy is more off-the-shelf solution. So when we created the bystander intervention course, that resides on Sage Academy. So it's like, if you're looking for an innovative approach to anti-harassment, we got you covered. If you're looking for tools on anything, the storytelling course, so storytelling for learning designers is on there. We partnered with another trainer and created a course on how to run experiential facilitation, which is like, it's kind of like it's almost like an experiential facilitation masterclass. Michelle Cummings is the SME that we worked with to create that one. And then we're about to launch during ATD, because we're going to be speaking at ATD next week on the topic of intrinsic motivation and how to incorporate elements of intrinsic motivation into learning design, which that could be a whole other podcast or talk. But we're launching a short form kind of email challenge because we wanted to find out, is this a topic that people are interested in? What do they need to know? Sometimes you have that curse of knowledge. Like I know I've studied this for so long that I'm like, okay, well, where do we need to start with this? But yeah, so that you'll be able to sign up for that. We're doing kind of like pre-orders, and that's just going to be a two-week email challenge to kind of introduce people to a little bit of cognitive science, self-determination theory, and within self-determination theory provides the outline for intrinsic motivation. So essentially, how do we tap into the three primary drivers for intrinsic motivation, which is autonomy, relatedness, and proficiency, right? So those are the three things that we really focus on. How do you incorporate elements of autonomy into learning? How do you incorporate elements of proficiency? And how do you incorporate elements of relatedness, both with the cohort as well as with the facilitator and with the company? So yeah, those are the main things that we're covering. And then, yeah, people have questions or anything like that. I mean, I love just chatting with people and setting up talks like this and answering questions. I've got just so much research that I just want to kind of share it with with everybody. So I'm like, this is the stuff that really has made a difference in my personal life. Learning about communication styles, nonviolent communication, motivational interviewing styles. There's so much.
That's one of the topics that I think you and I will dig in another session is you're interviewing people, and you said, there's that is an art form, a skill that most people, you need to develop that. And then also, how do you come into those conversations without already having an expectation of what it's going to be about, so you can actually listen to what's going on and actually pick up those patterns. So that would be just a fabulous talk too. But even just what you talk. Yeah,
The
go
word
ahead.
I was trying to think of earlier was qualitative analysis. So instead of quantitative analysis, it's a more qualitative research process.
There you go. Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that even working with one of the things that we do is, like you said, we come in with subject matter expertise, or we have cursive knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do you stay open-minded and ask questions that are going to lead you to things that you don't expect to learn, right? That's cool.
Yeah.
But that whole intrinsic motivation, it's funny because you said, oh, who's going to be interested in this? And then they said, no, we have too many people. We've got to open up another session. So you're running 2 sessions now, right? Which is awesome. So I'm excited. I'm excited about your course actually coming out. So I hope you,
cool.
I hope you let me know as soon as that comes out, because then I'll shout it out to the world, because I think it's really going to be valuable. So
awesome. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I'll let you know where we have everything. We had everything written to create a full-fledged course, and now I'm actually trimming it down to create smaller bite-sized email pieces. And it's like, I just wanted, what is the simplest introduction I can do to this concept? And once again, like, so much of what we focus on is giving people tools. And that was what was hard with the intrinsic motivation thing, is that it's a lot of theory. And so it's like, with the storytelling course, we could walk you through, and it's like step by step, and then bam, you're done. Here's your story. You've got this thing. With intrinsic motivation, it's a little bit geekier, and it gets into like, it's like, okay, well, there's elements around the way we all behave that is, we just need to like kind of convey this foundational understanding. And then we can start to build some of the tools that will be incorporated into your curriculum. So this will be kind of like the 101 introductory topics, along with a couple of little tools to just go back and assess your existing curriculum and be like, hey, how intrinsically motivating is this? And how can I improve my previous portfolio?
That's awesome. That alone is going to change lives, I think. And maybe make some people cry, but
it sucks. Makes you cry in this industry. It's brutal.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really, really appreciate this. This was so much fun.
Awesome. Yeah, I had a great time. And I hope we get a chance to do another one sometime soon.